Using leverage for wealth building. Hey everyone, it's Wolfgang. So this video is how to use leverage to help you build wealth. Okay? So people are cautious with money. Money is a scarce resource, right? And when you get money, you tend to protect it. It's a scarce resource. When you earn money, you tend to, most people are more concerned with protecting the money they have than to take new risks to make more money, right? So if you have some money saved and someone says, are you willing to put all that money at risk or a portion of that money at risk to earn more? A lot of people will say, unless it's a very conservative investment that's safe, no, I've got the money, I'm going to protect it. It's in a CD, something safe or a treasury bond. So most people emphasize protecting the money they have and prefer that over taking new risks. Okay, so that's not true for everyone, but it's true for a lot of people because money is a scarce resource. So there's not a lot of leverage there. We earn money, we set it aside, and we make a return. We have a salary. We have a return by investing in an IRA or 401k. That's a very safe way to invest your early income, right? So that's a return on your investments. So thinking about leverage, time leverage is something that a lot of people don't really consider to their detriment, in my opinion. Because if you think about it, okay, you have two choices when you get out of college. You can become an employee at an existing company, or you can start your own company, right? So which one is the most time efficient? Becoming an employee. So the first time you use time leverage is choosing not to try to start your own business. Because when you become an employee out of college, you're 2 weeks away from your first paycheck. With the business that you might try to start, there's no telling how long it would take if you ever got to that point where your business would earn you the same paycheck that you're 2 weeks away from when you start your first job out of college. So this is the first use of time leverage. This is more time efficient to become an employee. Okay? So the first use of financial leverage, this is an example, could be buying a first rental property. The mortgage, the money that you borrow to buy the property is the leverage. You don't really have enough to pay cash for the property, so you use the leverage of only putting a portion, a down payment, on the property and borrowing the rest. So you're leveraging other people's money to buy a rate of return. The rental property is a rate of return. So this is the first use of financial leverage. This is what we did not very long out of college. If you look at the very first video on my channel, I described that first investment. It was a 9-unit apartment building. It was bank owned. It had been foreclosed on, and it was cash flow positive immediately. We got a very good deal on it. So a lot of people do that. They will buy a rental property as their first use of financial leverage. The leverage is the loan, other people's money you're leveraging to buy a cash flow, the cash flow from the rental property. So return on time. So this was time leverage, becoming an employee. So let's think about return on time in more general terms, okay? So a lot of people work 40 hours a week, 50 weeks out of the year. They earn 10% on the IRA, okay? Compare that to working 10 hours once a year, because leases go for 12 months. Working 10 hours to turn over a vacant rental unit. So we have been owning and operating rental properties for a long time. When someone moves out, the amount of time it takes to turn over that unit to get it ready for the next tenant varies. But spending 10 hours is not out of the question. But you only have to do that once a year, okay? So that's a good return on time because if you have enough rental units, to make the same income that you would make working 40 hours, 50 weeks out of the year, this is a much better return on time, right? So, so that gets you thinking about return on time. A rental property is not the only asset that this applies to. I'll mention a couple of other assets that give a great return on time so that you don't have to work in a couple seconds here. So let's say that the property also earns a 10% annual return, depreciation and rental income combined gives you a 10% return. So you can make 10% on your IRA working 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, or you can work 10 hours a year and make the same return, right? Through depreciation and cash flow from the rent. So one thing to think about, okay? Long-term thinking, once the property is paid off, the cash flow increases astronomically. Once the mortgage is paid off, the rents have gone up, right? The rents go up almost every year. Some years they're flat, some years they go up more than other years. But in general, rents go up, rents increase. So over the time you own the rental property, the rental income is increasing. Once the mortgage is paid off, you have 10 hours a year. That's assuming the tenant moves out. every year, and they don't. A lot of tenants, we've had tenants that have stayed in some of our rental properties for over 10 years. But let's just say they move out at the end of each time the lease ends, the 12-month lease ends. You've got 10 hours per unit to turn it over for the next tenant. So eventually, the 10% becomes a much larger number. Again, this is long-term thinking. You're going to pay off that asset, the rental property, and your only expenses are property taxes and insurance and, minor maintenance now and then, right? So that's just food for thought, because initially I was just comparing, let's say that the property only earns 10% through cash flow from the rent and depreciation write-off, because depreciation is a write-off on your taxes. If you compare that to all this time, right, this is a much better return on time, because if you only have to devote 10 hours a year per unit, you've got all that other time to figure out ways to use your time effectively in other ways. So let's talk about that. Let's leverage income producing assets. Real estate is an income producing asset, but there are other income producing assets you can also own and make an income from. If you stick to the standard pattern, 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year, the return on your time is low. When you are absorbed in a job, right, it's very difficult to have outside activities to earn money. You can only have so many distractions if you want to avoid getting fired from your job, right? So the return on time with the job is low. I mean, in the beginning, it was a great idea. You were fresh out of college. You needed an income in 2 weeks, right? You're 2 weeks away from your first paycheck. So this was a good return on time. But as time goes on, you need to think longer term and stop working. You need to stop working, and you need to get a much better return on your time. So compare these other high return on time leverage assets besides residential rental property. Contractor garage rentals. There are public storage rentals. There are strip malls, if you can do that. That works in some parts of the country. You can be a silent partner, minority owner of businesses that earn cash for you that you don't have to participate in. So, for example, Warren Buffett owns a lot of businesses that he never actively works in, and he makes money from those. Those are his income producing assets. He's in a lot of cases, he's more than a silent partner. He owns the whole business. But in other businesses, they don't own the entire business. Another person who does this is Alex Hormozy. He takes a silent partner investment in operating companies and gets an income stream from those. That's another person who does this. Minority ownership of a percentage of an operating business that earns you a cash flow, and you don't have to work in that business. You just get the cash flow. Another high return on time leverage investment, dividend paying stocks and bond income. So if you look at these income producing assets, that's what you should be shooting for using leverage for wealth building. You're getting a much higher return on your time. You're leveraging your time much better, because the leverage of 10 hours a year to make a 10% return is much higher than 2,000 hours, because 40 hours a week times 50 weeks a year is 2,000 hours. 2,000 hours to earn 10% versus 10 hours to earn the same 10%. So you're much more highly leveraged here. You've got 10 hours and you're levering that up into a 10% return, cash return, investment return, that you would otherwise, if you were on a salary, have to work 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year. So as you go through life, if you find yourself, and I figured this out early on, right out of college, that's why we started buying income producing assets almost immediately out of college, because it was clear that over the long term, the way you get absorbed in a standard salary job, just to give you an example, when we bought that first 9-unit apartment building 2 years out of college, my boss, it was a job out of college. My boss gave me holy hell for buying that, okay? Because he was concerned that it would distract me from the work. And so that's a natural reaction for a boss. You've got an employee and you think, and the boss doesn't know anything about real estate. He knows none of this. He doesn't run it through his mind. When I sign a lease, it's for 12 months. And when do I see the landlord? I never see them. I pay the rent. And then when the lease is over, then the landlord has to clean the property. He's not thinking about that. He doesn't understand real estate, how real estate works. He just gave me all kinds of grief for when he found, and I didn't ask him permission. I just did it, right? So, and that started our family on the path to never having to work a regular job, right? So long-term thinking, you want to position yourself so you have a high return on your time. The leverage for wealth building at the core, it's a return on your investments, the cash return, the income streams from the investments. But the core return you want to maximize, the maximum leverage, is maximizing your time leverage, how much you get for as little time spent as possible. So Warren Buffett doesn't spend any time working at See's Candies or at Geico or at any of the other businesses they own. He has other things to do with his time. Warren Buffett has figured out how to get maximum leverage on a small amount of his time. He leverages small amounts of his time into huge income streams. Elon Musk, same thing. So you kind of get the idea. Using leverage for wealth building, yes, you want to use financial leverage when you buy a rental property, but the thing you should think about, the thing you should commit yourself to, is looking at everything in your life and figuring out, how do I get the maximum leverage out of the time I spend on this activity? And that could mean increasing your holdings over time of dividend-paying stocks, bonds, that give a return, owning portions of businesses as a silent partner and getting an income stream and not having to work in the business, owning residential rental property or any of these other ones, contractor garages, public storage spaces, those sorts of things. You want to think in terms of income producing assets. About the only time being an employee is a good idea is when you're first out of college and you really don't know enough to start a business, and you need an income pretty quickly. So when you make the best use of your time out of college, you're 2 weeks away from your first paycheck and you can pay your rent and feed yourself. So that's the right choice there. But later on, you've got to emphasize for wealth building, maximizing your return on time. So I hope this helps. Leveraging being able to leverage your money and leverage your time, more importantly, is really important for wealth building. And if you have any questions about this, I do have experience doing this. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And I want to thank everyone for watching and have a great day.